So my father was a construction worker who I told from 5th grade all the way through sophomore year in high school, I'm going to be a CPA, Dad. He said, fine, if you can get a job in accounting, you don't have to work for me anymore. So I said, okay. So I interviewed, I took out the newspaper, I circled every job that was looking for a new staff accountant. I interviewed at all 9 of the jobs, and on the 9th job, I told the guy, there's a pick and a shovel waiting for me. I'm not going back to that. What's your biggest problem? How can I solve it?
From there, he proved that determination can drive success.
And I think that's really the American secret, right? You can access success if you're willing to work hard and obtain the educational system necessary to do the job that you really want.
On today's episode, we have Manny Ramirez, president of RJI International CPAs and co-founder of Hispanic 100, an influential business committee.
I love that our community reinforces family and faith. There has to be an opportunity to acquire academic knowledge, because in the absence of that, no matter how hard you work, you'll be the hardest day laborer because of lack of knowledge.
With that being said, let's get into today's Impactful Latinos. Welcome, Manny.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here with you.
Let's begin with your CPA.
Yes, ma'am.
And you have your own business?
I do. I have an accounting firm.
Oh, what's it called?
It's RJI International CPAs, which stands for Ramirez Jimenez International CPAs, and I'm the Ramirez in the company.
How did you build that?
Yeah, great question. So I don't get credit for starting it. I was at Price Waterhouse. I had graduated with an accounting degree. I was doing corporate tax law at Price Waterhouse, a very large accounting firm. And Roberto Miranda and Paul Strabla had built the largest Hispanic CPA firm in the country. And they had interviewed me and said, Manuel, we'd love to have you come and do corporate and international tax for us. So I said, well, sure, let's give it a shot. I had already worked at a large firm for 3 years. So I joined the firm, and unfortunately, a year later, the firm split. So at 27 years old, I was offered partnership in the firm. And I grew the firm to 2 offices and 50 people, because I went with the smaller part of the firm. Mm-hmm. And then 10 years later, unfortunately, he passed away, and I became 100% owner of the firm. And today we sit at 45 employees and 20 consultants, doing work in 30 countries, international tax, audits for publicly traded companies, M&A transactions, which means mergers and acquisitions, and full-service public accounting services.
Growing up, your dad he had a construction company.
That's right,
didn't
yeah.
he?
Yes, yes.
So can you tell me how you went from that environment to wanting to become a CPA?
Sure. Great question. So my father was a construction worker. He's from Texas, and when he came here, he and his 2 brothers mainly did construction work. And it's our culture. At 10 years old, you're a man, you have to go work in construction. Mm-hmm. So we're up at 4:30, we're helping load the truck, and we're preparing our day. And then we go to the job site, drop off tools, and come back, and that's just the life that we had. And I can recall, after about a year of this, I saw this little man in a suit in a suitcase walk into a trailer that was air conditioned, and I said, Dad, is that air conditioned? Yeah. Who is that? Well, that's the accountant. What's he doing in there? Well, he's doing the books. I gave my dad the shovel. I go, Dad, I want to be an accountant. I don't want to do construction anymore. and true story. And he goes, you're 10 years old. You don't know what you want. Maybe I might have been 3rd grade. So what would that have been? I might have been 8 or 9 years old. So a little before 10. And then the idea of being an accountant was reinforced when in I think it was 5th grade, I heard 2 teachers talking about how one was dating an accountant, how they only worked 4 months out of the year and made a lot of money. And I told my mom, that's it. I'm not going to be an accountant. I'm going to be a CPA. And I told my mom, what's a CPA? All I knew was that the pretty teacher was going to date a guy who only worked 4 months of the year and made a lot of money. So for me, I thought, I could do that. And then about my sophomore year in high school, my father, who I told from 5th grade all the way through sophomore year in high school, I'm going to be a CPA, Dad. He said, fine, if you can get a job in accounting, you don't have to work for me anymore. So I said, okay. So I interviewed, I took out the newspaper, I circled every job that was looking for a new staff accountant. I interviewed at all 9 of the jobs, and on the 9th job, I told the guy, there's a pick and a shovel waiting for me. I'm not going back to that. What's your biggest problem? How can I solve it? And the man happened to be Mr. Dilbeck. He happened to be a professor at Long Beach who was teaching advanced finance, who had his own CPA firm, small, 4 people. And he says, I don't know how to use this new thing called Excel. I took the books and I said, tomorrow I will I will help you with your Excel problems. Let me have the books. I spent the whole night till midnight reading the books, learning Excel. I went back the next day and I said, what do you want to do? And I did all thing. He goes, okay, you're hired. So I invested in the knowledge to get the job. And for a year, I worked for the man. I even became his teacher's assistant. And I got to see how he lived his life in his version of accounting. And it made me decide that would be good for me. At one point, I would have my own firm. But I knew the importance of working for these large, huge accounting firms to understand how the best firms do it before I can start my own firm. Because once I knew how the best do it, I could emulate that. And that's really how we've created our firm, to emulate Pricewaterhouse, where I worked, because we want to be that for our community. And so today, over half of our employees are Hispanic, and over half our employees are women, because I think there's a glass ceiling today that no one talks about. There aren't that many Hispanics in partnerships at the Big Four, and there aren't that many women. So if I could create a firm that permits people to have an access to that, then that's my little way of giving back to the community. So that's my story in accounting.
Incredible, Manny. And how did you create it? I know you said you started a bank,
Yes.
right? How did that go?
Not so well.
Why?
Not so well, because I had conceived of the idea through my own personal experience that if we can create a small bank that lent to the Hispanic community, that would be good for us. And we raised about $14 million, took about a year and a half. We started the process, but our timing was a little bad, because in 2008, the banking crisis started. And the FDIC came out and said, we don't want you lending to the Hispanic community. And I said, well, that's our charter, and that's what we're going to do. And they said, you don't understand, you will not be a bank unless you do what we say. And I was shocked that the federal government would be so forceful about telling us what we couldn't do what we were chartered to do. They literally said, you need to buy one of our bad banks and take over, because we don't want to have to insure them. And it felt a little bit like blackmail, like you will take this or we will shut you down. And so I don't negotiate with terrorists or FDIC members. I said, well, what's my other options? I apologize, that's a pretty strict or tough way to describe them. But it was a federal government overreach at a time of crisis. And I don't think it was right what they did. So the other options they gave me was to either sell it to someone else or to merge with another bank. So I elected to sell the bank. And we voted to do that. And I learned, even in that moment where we had received offers to sell the bank for more than we had invested, the FDIC acted as a roadblock and says, we will not let you sell at a profit. If you pick the highest bidder to sell your bank, we will take 2 years to approve that process. But if you pick the second highest bidder, we'll approve it today. And that's my experience with the FDIC. It wasn't good, and it makes me respect the banks that have been around so long, how much they have to go through from federal oversight. It's very tough. So my hat's off to those people who decide to become bankers. It's not as easy as it looks.
That's something else.
It is something else. It was very uncomfortable to go through that for those 3-4 years that we were running the banks. Because I just wanted to help small business owners have access to capital. That's a real problem for our community. We don't have access to capital. And
really?
Yeah, it's a very challenging thing. I tried to buy my CPA firm. I was very young. I was 26, 27. And I had to buy and write a check to buy my share of the firm. And my father had property in Santa Ana. So I would go to banks and I'd say, these are my father's properties, can I borrow? And they said, Manny, we don't lend to property in that zone. We don't lend to Hispanics in Santa Ana. Right to my face. I was shocked that was the case. So
Is that legal?
I don't think it's legal anymore.
Okay.
I'm not sure it was legal back then either. But that's the real experience. I'm not alone in describing this experience. I think they call it redlining, where banks decide they just don't want to lend to certain communities or certain properties and areas. But that was my experience. So my solution is start a bank and lend to people in the community. If they won't lend to us, we can get together, raise capital, and lend to our own community. But there were other roadblocks I didn't foresee, such as the FDIC, right, or the banking crisis. So that's an unfortunate timing. It taught me to love my profession as a CPA, because we don't have that type of oversight of our profession, right? We have the IRS looking at people's tax returns. And as long as we do our job right, we win all our audits. When the taxpayers file tax returns and they make mistakes, then we can help them understand what those mistakes are and make sure they pay their fair share in taxes. But for the most part, our firm has been around for 40 years. For the most part, we've been very fortunate in that we've had a very good record with the IRS in producing tax returns that are supported by evidential matter and supported by case law. So we're not taking positions outside of what's considered the acceptable norm. Yeah.
You have a long report history as a CPA, and one of them is working for the state of California.
Yes, that's
Can
true.
you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So we were, one of the PACs, business PACs I'm part of, is the Lincoln Club of Orange County. And Gray Davis was the governor at the time, was doing a very bad job. He was tripling car taxes, so we started a recall. And we were successful at that recall. And most of us got in behind Arnold Schwarzenegger because we thought we had the name and we thought he would do a great job for us. And so when he won, he said, Manuel, I'd like you to be part of my administration, his people that work for him, the appointment secretary. And I said, well, no, I have a bank and a CPA firm. I'm busy right now. Plus I'm running the Hispanic 100 and I'm on a couple other nonprofit boards like Make-A-Wish Foundation. So I really don't want to do politics. I don't think I'm ready. And they said, well, what would it take? And I said, tell you what, if we get Schwarzenegger reelected, then I'll say yes. So a week after we got him reelected, they said, you said you would come work. Okay, well, what's the least amount of work I can do in politics? And so the governor appointed me to the California Board of Accountancy. So kind of like the state bar regulates all the attorneys, the California Board of Accountancy regulates the 100,000 plus CPAs in the state of California.
Wait, how many?
100,000. Over 100,000 CPAs in the state of California. So this board is intended to look at, it's a consumer protection board. It takes complaints or concerns lodged against CPAs, and those CPAs then have to rebut and say that they didn't do anything wrong.
Yes.
And so in my 7 years on the California Board of Accountancy, I adjudicated over 300 cases. And in those cases, there were some cases where the CPAs did something wrong, and they appropriately lost their license. And if they did wrong, we would refer them to the Attorney General's office, and some of those people ended up with being charged with crimes. But for the most part, CPAs are very careful rule followers. And I'd say 99% of the time, it was very rare for them to make a mistake. And if they did, it was almost inadvertent. So it was an appropriate board to ensure consumers are protected. But we did things like, one of my marquee things was to improve the ethics of the board. Before I got on the board would require an ethics class every 6 years. But our license was renewed every 2 years. So I said, well, why don't we just put an element, every 2 years you have to do some form of ethics, even just 4 hours. So I lobbied for that, and I was successful in getting that passed. And for the last 10 years, every CPA who passes their tests, who gets their CPA license renewed, is required to take some ethics classes. The result was the penalties for making mistakes went substantially down because CPAs are rule followers. As long as they remember the rules, they're pretty good at following those rules. So that's an example of some of the things we did at the Board of Accountancy. Yeah.
And what has it allowed you, having your own business, being a CPA, as a Latino in the United States, how has that impacted you and changed you?
Yeah. So what's interesting about being a CPA is you're constantly helping people with problems. Usually it's tax problems. People will come to me and say, Manuel, I don't have the money to pay these taxes. It's $1 million. And so we have an opportunity to try to solve that problem. And so that's how we've made our name, by taking people's problems, trying to figure out, is there a better way to do something? And so you become a problem solver. And those skills apply to many, many things around the world. So for us, for example, I had bad experiences in banking, trying to obtain loans to buy into my practice. So I attempted to start a small bank in Santa Ana called the Santa Ana Business Bank, along with several people in the community. And it was a very challenging situation because it was 2008 when the banking crisis happened. But I took my CPA skills and brought it to that profession. And since I was always taught to give back to the community, most of my teachers were Franciscan nuns and priests. I was always taught, please give back to the community as you're doing well, no matter how you're doing in life, just give back. There's always someone who's poor or doing worse off than you. It allowed me to give back, and I served for a short time as president of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and that experience and the issues I saw there allowed me to then start 2 other business political action committees, the Hispanic 100 and Gen X PAC. Yeah.
Can you tell me more a little bit about those?
Sure. So at the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce was really good at getting small businesses together so they could network together. But my attempts to connect small businesses with the political process had a lot of adversity. People really weren't interested in the political element. And I just thought it was a little short-sighted. And so someone told me, we don't have a Hispanic business pack in the state of California, would you think about starting one? And this was Carlos Olamendi, who owned restaurants and who was almost a diplomat from Mexico City to us, and the sheriff of Orange County, the assistant sheriff, George Jaramillo. And they said, this is something that the time is right, and would you consider starting this? And so I started 15 years ago, the Hispanic 100. And the sole attempt was to get Hispanic business owners and leaders to connect with our politicians, our electeds, to create some synergies so that the electeds could understand issues important to us, but more importantly, to finally get our Hispanic community engaged in the political process. You know, in Mexico, the PRI ran for 100 years. It didn't matter how you voted, they were going to win. But in America, we have a system of accountability that allows us to have a voice when we're engaged. But our history has, in essence, dissuaded us from being involved in the political process. So Hispanic 100 was an attempt to get more political involvement. And we're proud to say that we mentor 10 to 15 students, high school students, encourage them to go to college. And some of those we encourage through the college experience to get jobs in politics. And in addition to that, we have many meetings throughout the year to connect business owners with elected officials, congressmen, assemblymen, senators, governors, because we want them to understand things that are important to our community from a business perspective. So that's what Hispanic 100 does.
Wow, that's incredible. And who are some of the members?
So our current chair, I served as chairman for the first 6 years. Our current chairman is Mario Rodriguez. Mario was a former Social Security Administration appointee of President Bush. He was also on the athletic committee they regulate the boxing for Governor Schwarzenegger. John Cruz, he was an appointment secretary for Governor Schwarzenegger, an appointee. He was also an appointee to the Union Impact Committee that helped negotiate union contracts between the U.S. government and the unions, federal contracts. Former U.S. Treasurer Rosario Marin, she's also a member. Former State Senator Bob Pacheco's on there. Ms. Carranza, the former U.S. Treasurer, current SBA head, she's on our advisory committee. So many people from Texas, Florida, D.C., and California serve to advise us on how best to create this synergy that we're looking for.
How did you have time for all this?
That's a great question. You just have to make time for things that are important. So I was raised, as I mentioned, my teachers were mainly Franciscans. They said you have to give back to the community. So you have to put God first, you put family second, and then you have to figure out how to reconcile your life within that kind of paradigm. So for me, that was doing good things in the community, helping the poor. I felt an obligation to give back to a profession that had done so much for me. And so we just made time. The board wasn't a full-time job. It was 2 days every other month.
Okay.
So now reviewing files this big, 4 of them every other month, so about 2,000 pages every other month, that wasn't fun. But if you think about it, the legislature has to do that every week. They're supposed to read it all.
Okay.
You hope they read it all.
Mm-hmm.
But so for me, it was very enlightening. And it also allowed me to become a better version of a CPA, bringing that experience back to my firm and saying, these are the things people are doing wrong. Let's not do those things. And we really raised the bar of how we practice as a firm, which allowed us to double in size twice at this point. So we're very blessed. We're very blessed.
Let's take it back a little bit. So did you grow up in Southern California?
My father was from Texas. He's from Laredo, Texas. And he has a very interesting family history. His family came as a Spanish land grant family in the early 1700s, so 1720. And so their land grant to the Benavides land grant was everything from Corpus Christi through all of South Texas, including Corpus Christi and Laredo. Now, back then, the King of Spain could just say, this is your property, go. Now, many people settled in South America or Central America or Mexico. Our family just happened to settle in Texas. And so at the time, it was part of the Spanish Empire, I guess that we would call it. Mexico fought against Spain, so they became independent. Texas fought against Mexico to become independent. And so our family history is that of a Tejano, which is a Texan. We stayed there for 7 generations until the Great Depression, and all the land, the topsoil from Texas got blown into the Midwest. So the cattle ranching that we used to do was no longer sustainable. And over that process, there were many bad things that happened. I mean, when we became a republic, a lot of the Americans came and squatted on our land. The most notable was the King Ranch, which is funny because they're the largest ranch in Texas, and yet from our family history, they were just squatters that sat on our land. And so I know it's just the way it is. And so history is told by the winners. And so for our people, we lost a lot of land, but we retained enough of it that our family was well taken care of for many years, for many generations. But after the Great Depression, our family and my grandfather came to California looking for opportunity to raise his 8 children. And all 3 of my uncles went to serve in the service. Actually, all 5 of my uncles served in the military because we love our country and want to fight for this version of America. You know, the things that they experienced in the 50s and 60s, where anyone born in any family can rise and do well. And that's certainly the opportunity they gave me. I couldn't speak English before I started first grade. I was a sick child. And thanks to the American education system and the private Catholic school system that I experienced, I was able to obtain the education I needed to succeed. And I think that's really the American secret, right?
Yes.
You can access success if you're willing to work hard and obtain the educational system necessary to do the job that you really want.
You mentioned before that there was that language issue. Can
Yeah.
you tell me a little bit about it?
Sure.
Can you share?
So because both of my parents spoke primarily Spanish, and they are very proud, my mom very proud of their Mexican roots, wanted me to be bilingual, so they basically taught me Spanish. And my mother told me a story that I couldn't tell the nurses that I needed to use the bathroom. And I kept trying to tell them I need to use the bathroom, and I couldn't use the bathroom. And my mom decided at that moment that would be the last time we spoke Spanish in our home. I was 5 years old. And from that point forward, we spoke nothing but English in the house. And they would speak Spanish when they didn't want us to understand what was happening. But for the most part, we spoke nothing. So I went from speaking nothing but Spanish for 5 years to nothing but English until I was well into my 20s.
And what happened in your
You're
place?
going to make me tell that story.
Yes.
So I had worked for a couple of large accounting firms, and I had just joined Miranda Strabel, the firm that I own now, 32 years ago. And I was on a phone call with Mexico City, and the attorney, I was doing my best to try to understand what their tax issue was. And the attorney told me, "Manuel, please speak to me in English. Your Spanish offends me." I was so embarrassed that day I went to the bookstore and bought the diplomat tapes on how to speak Spanish. And I hired an Argentinian woman to teach me how to speak Spanish for the next 2 years because I didn't want to put myself in that situation again. And it just goes to show that adversity is the mother of invention. For me, that moment made me acquire a language skill that I probably had embedded in me at a very young age, but required so much work to try to create and learn again. So that's why I speak Spanish today.
I can just imagine growing up, and you look very Hispanic.
Thank you.
And people coming up to you, speaking to you in Spanish, right? And you're like, "I'm sorry, but I don't understand you." But you could, right? You could probably understand them.
I could understand.
You
I just couldn't speak.
Okay.
Yeah. My grandparents, my mother's parents and my father's parents were primarily Spanish speakers. So they talked to us in Spanish, and I'd get 50%, and then I'd talk back to them. I was fortunate, though, to learn Spanish while my grandparents lived well into their late 90s. So I was able to learn Spanish at an age where I could understand all the stories about Pancho Villa and him running into the hills and thinking, there's no way, you couldn't be alive at that time. He goes, oh, no. So when I was like 6, 7 years old, this is what happened. Pancho Villa would come in, you could hear the military, and they would be horrible to the people. And I'm thinking, I can't believe my grandfather, Juan Salgado, lived through the Civil War in the time of Pancho Villa, things we read about in our history books. So I was grateful that I took the time to learn the language so that I could hear the stories of our family. Yeah.
I know you like to be probably behind the scenes, but from what you said, you started your own company, you're involved in nonprofits, you started a foundation for Latinos and empowering the youth. What's one of the things that you would want to say to Latinos, especially the families, the moms and dads, to encourage their kids? What issue do you see that could encourage them?
Yeah, I love that our community reinforces family and faith. I think those are great cornerstones of a good, honorable, ethical person. And I love that they instill work ethic. But there has to be, this is for the parents of Hispanic children, there has to be an opportunity to acquire academic knowledge. Because in the absence of that, no matter how hard you work, you'll be the hardest day laborer because of lack of knowledge. Or maybe you'll be the best mechanic. But allowing our children to go to universities and get advanced degrees is the key to, coupled with hard work, to success. And I think our community can do a better job of supporting our youth in academic achievement. And that's something I wish the parents would do. And for the kids, don't forget where you came from. Because a lot of them will leave Santa Ana and stop giving back. Because they never had it and their parents never had it, so they're just enjoying their wealth. And if they're people of faith or family, then they'll do the right thing. They'll come and they'll help their family, those that are suffering a little bit but not doing as well. And I think that's really what our community has to do. And when that happens, then we'll start to work together better.
What are you doing now? Anything that you would like to mention?
Yeah, so our CPA firm is part of this international network of CPA firms. Over 140 accounting firms in 100 countries. And this last week I was at a conference in South Carolina, and they asked me if I'd be president following the current president. So I'll be helping to lead how accounting firms can work better together to compete against the largest firms. So that'll be my new venture for the next 3 years.
Anything new you want to mention regarding the Hispanic 100?
When I was president for the first 6 years, we focused on creating opportunities between elected officials and business leaders. Under the current leadership of Manny Ramirez, he's focused more on mentorship of the youth, understanding that's our future. I think over the next 6 years, we need to do both. We need to do both better. We need to have the youth, and we have to help people become elected officials so we have a voice in the political process. And I think there's some examples of where that's happened. In Florida, for example, the Cuban community really supported Marco Rubio, and now he's a state senator. Other than president, that's among the most powerful men in the world, in the country for sure. And in Texas, they've done a good job of working together because you have Hispanic leaders, many Hispanic leaders in Texas as well. So I think California, we have an opportunity to learn to work together to achieve the same thing. We've had some success with Loretta Sanchez and her sister Linda, but I just don't see as many pro-business Hispanic people in the political process. So I'd like to see that as something we work on together in the
Who
future.
can join? Can anyone join? Is there a fee?
Yes, I think so. There's no membership. I wanted an organization where people just had access to politics. So there's no membership. There's no joining. You only have to go to the Hispanic100.org website, put your email in, and we'll invite you to our events. And there's a golf tournament with many Hispanic actors up in Los Angeles once a year, and there's an annual banquet where they'll invite top Hispanic business leaders to come speak to us so we can understand what's happening as part of the current administration and the prior administrations. So it's open to anyone who wants to come.
Do you still, I just have this question and it just came out. Do you still have ranchos? Do you still have like ranches?
Yes. So
are you still a vaquero, a cowboy?
I am.
Because you're in suit.
I know.
So do you wear the hat? Are you like Texan?
Yes,
where you wear that? You do?
Every weekend, yes, ma'am.
Every weekend?
Yes, my.
Do you know how to ride a horse?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So I own 2 horses, and my father has a horse, and he's got a little ranch about 2.5 acres near Paris, California, and so we go and we work the ranch and we ride, and it's a Texan thing to do, right? To be around the barbecue and the horses, and it's just the culture that stayed with us. The big ranch in Texas, though, after the 7 generations, was finally sold off about 10 years ago. So we don't have a land imprint there anymore. But like every Texan, there's mineral rights and other things that go along with the land that stay with the family forever. But for the most part, the big 8,000 acres of ranch and 800 little pieces are all gone now, have been sold off. But yeah, so I have a Tennessee Walker, and I like to ride on at least once or twice a month. And my father's got a black and white paint, and I own a buckskin horse that is a broodmare for other ponies. So we still kept that part of our cultural life. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Manny, for joining us today.
It was a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.